The band stopped mid-note. Not a clean cutoff, not a rehearsed ending, but a jagged silence like someone had yanked the power cord from existence itself. Doc Severinsen's trumpet was still at his lips, his fingers frozen on the valves. The drummer's sticks hung in the air. 400 audience members held their breath as the Tonight Show band, the most professional musicians in television, stood paralyzed, staring at something nobody else could see. Johnny Carson was 3 words into introducing the next guest when the silence hit. The absence of music was so sudden, so complete, that it felt like negative sound, a vacuum that pulled all other noise from the studio. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome. Johnny turned to the band. Doc. But Doc Severinsen wasn't looking at Johnny. He was looking past him, through him, at something in the space between the stage and the audience. His face had gone pale beneath the stage makeup. The trumpet slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a clang that echoed like thunder in the silence. Then Johnny heard it, in the space where the music should have been. A sound that had haunted him for 31 years. Piano keys. A simple melody. The Missouri Waltz, being played by fingers that hadn't touched keys since 1959. His mother's song, Ruth Carson's only piece. The one she played every night before bed until the stroke took her left hand's movement, then her right, then everything. How did a band's sudden silence reveal a ghost piano playing a dead woman's lullaby? Johnny's legs buckled. Ed McMahon started to stand, but he was frozen too, caught in whatever spell had seized the band. The audience sat in perfect stillness, not understanding, but feeling something monumental happening. The piano continued, not from the band's keyboard. Tommy Newsom sat frozen at his silent instrument. The music came from nowhere and everywhere, filling the vacuum the band had created, and with it a voice, humming, the way Ruth used to hum when she thought nobody was listening. Mom! Johnny whispered into his microphone. The word carried through the studio like a prayer. The humming stopped. Then, clear as day, from an empty space above the band. Hello, John. Nobody called him John except Ruth. Even in her final years, when she couldn't remember much, she remembered that her son was John, not Johnny. John William Carson, who she'd carried through the Depression, raised alone while Homer worked, protected from Homer's rage, pushed toward dreams she'd never been allowed to have. This isn't possible, Johnny said to the air. Possible is relative when you're running out of time, Ruth's voice replied. The band can hear me. They've always been able to hear me. Every night for 15 years, I've been sitting with them. Tommy knows. Don't you, Tommy? The keyboard player nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. She's been here since 1975, Johnny. The year she died. Sits right there. He pointed to an empty space beside his keyboard. Never says anything. Just listens. Smiles when you nail a joke. Frowns when you're hurting and hiding it. But this wasn't the moment everyone remembers. The moment everyone remembers came when Johnny walked toward the band, toward the empty space where his mother's voice originated. As he got closer, the air grew warmer. The studio lights seemed to bend. And then, for just a moment, everyone saw her. Ruth Carson, not as she'd died, elderly, diminished, confused, but as she'd been in 1943. 35 years old. Beautiful. Sitting at an upright piano that existed in no physical space, but was somehow more real than anything else in the studio. Her left hand, the one the stroke had taken, moved perfectly across the keys. I need to tell you something, Ruth said, her voice now coming from her visible form. Before it's too late. Too late for what? For you to forgive yourself. Johnny stopped walking. Forgive myself for what? For becoming successful while I was dying. For being in New York while I was in Nebraska. For choosing the Tonight Show over the night shift at my bedside. For being Johnny Carson when I needed John. The accusations Johnny had whispered to himself every night for 15 years, now spoken by the one person who could absolve them. I was building something, Johnny said weakly. For us. For you. No, Ruth replied, her fingers never stopping their waltz. You were running. From Homer's shadow. For Nebraska's smallness. For my sadness. And that's exactly what you should have done. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Ruth stood from the piano. It vanished, but the music continued, sourceless now, ambient like memory itself. She walked toward Johnny. Floated might be more accurate, and the band unconsciously parted to let her through. Every mother, she said, has two dreams. The dream of keeping her child close and the dream of watching them fly. They're incompatible. One has to die for the other to live. You flew, John. You flew so far and so high that I spent my last years watching you on a television screen instead of across a dinner table. And that's exactly what should have happened. She reached out to touch Johnny's face. Her hand was translucent, but he felt it. Everyone could see he felt it by the way his hand flew to his cheek. Do you know what I did every night at the nursing home? Ruth asked. I made them all meet to the common room. 11:30 sharp. The nurses thought I was confused, that I didn't know who you were anymore. But I knew. I knew my John was on that screen, making millions of people happy. The same John who used to do magic tricks to make me laugh when Homer was drunk. The same John who'd sneak into my room during thunderstorms. The same John who promised he'd buy me a house without angry men in it. Johnny was crying now. Not the controlled tears of performance, but the broken sobbing of a son receiving absolution he'd never thought possible. You kept that promise, Ruth continued. You bought me 12 houses. I only needed one, but you kept buying them, as if houses could make up for presents. They couldn't, but they didn't need to, because you gave me something better than presents. You gave me pride. The band, still frozen in their strange tableau, began to move slightly. Not playing, but swaying, as if Ruth's waltz was moving through them. Play with me, Ruth said suddenly, turning to Doc Severinsen. Like we used to. Doc's eyes widened. We never. Not in this timeline, Ruth smiled, but in the one where I didn't marry Homer. Where I married that traveling musician. Where I raised John on the road with bands, instead of in a house with anger. That timeline bleeds through sometimes. Music is the thread between worlds. Play, Doc. Show John what could have been. Doc raised his trumpet to his lips, and without understanding how, played a harmony to Ruth's invisible piano. Then Tommy joined on keyboards. Not his keyboard, but the phantom piano Ruth had been playing. The drummer found a rhythm that shouldn't exist. The bass player plucked notes from an instrument that cast no shadow. They played the Missouri Waltz, but also something else, a song that had never been written from a life that had never been lived. Johnny's mother's song, if she'd been allowed to have a career. If she'd chosen music over stability. If she'd picked the dangerous dream over the safe compromise. This is what I gave up for you, Ruth said as the band played. Not just for you to exist, but for you to succeed. I chose Homer because he was stable. Chose Nebraska because it was safe. Chose sadness because it seemed safer than uncertainty. Every choice that made me smaller made you bigger. Every dream I surrendered became fuel for yours. The music built to something unprecedented in Tonight Show history. A supernatural symphony, the living and the dead performing together, the real and the possible harmonizing. What happened next was never meant to air, yet it changed everything. Ruth turned to the audience. All of you have someone like me. Someone who chose sacrifice over self. Someone whose unfulfilled dreams became your launching pad. They're here tonight. All of them. The band's pause didn't just let you hear me. It opened the door for all of them. The audience gasped as the studio filled with translucent figures. Parents, grandparents, mentors, loves who'd chosen to step aside. They stood beside their living counterparts, visible for just this moment, just this pause in time's music. 30 seconds, Ruth said. That's all we get. 30 seconds to tell you what we never could. The studio erupted in whispers, sobs, conversations between the living and the dead. Johnny saw them all. The janitor talking to his deceased father, the tourist from Iowa embracing her grandmother's ghost, Ed McMahon nodding as someone Johnny couldn't see whispered in his ear. 20 seconds, Ruth announced. Johnny grabbed his mother's translucent hand. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm not, Ruth replied. If you'd been there, you'd have been John. By being gone, you gotta be Johnny. And Johnny Carson brought more joy to my last years than John ever could have. I didn't need my son holding my hand. I needed him holding America's attention, proving that Carson women raise extraordinary men. 10 seconds. I love you, Johnny said. I know, Ruth replied. You told me every night. Every joke was a love letter. Every laugh was a kiss goodnight. Every show was you tucking me in from 1,000 miles away. 5 seconds. Ruth turned to Doc in the band. Play him off. Play all of us off. Make it beautiful. The band erupted into sound. Not the usual Tonight Show theme, but something new, something that had never been played before and would never be played again. Music for the living and the dead. Music for the space between presence and absence. Ruth and all the other spirits began to fade, but they were smiling, conducting the band with translucent hands, humming harmonies from another dimension. Remember, Ruth's voice echoed as she disappeared. The pause between notes is still part of the song. The last thing visible was her hand, conducting the final measure. Then nothing. Just the band playing. Just Johnny standing there, changed. Just 400 audience members who'd witnessed the impossible. The show continued. It had to, but something fundamental had shifted. Johnny interviewed his scheduled guests, but there was a rawness to him, an openness that had never been there before. He kept glancing at the space beside Tommy's keyboard. During the commercial breaks, he'd walk over and touch the air where his mother had been. The object on his desk suddenly meant everything. After the show, Johnny found something on his desk that hadn't been there before. Sheet music. The Missouri Waltz, but arranged differently. Ruth's arrangement. The one she'd never written, but had somehow left behind. At the bottom, in her handwriting, for John. Play this when you miss me. I'll hear it. Johnny had it framed, but never displayed. Too sacred. Too private. But every year on Ruth's birthday, he'd have Doc and the band perform it. Just once. During those performances, the cameras always picked up something strange. An extra shadow at the piano, fingers that weren't there playing notes that somehow sounded. The FCC received thousands of calls about that night. People swearing they'd seen deceased relatives in their television screens. That for 30 seconds, The Tonight Show had become a seance, a bridge between worlds. The official response was technical difficulties, but the tape tells a different story. The tape shows the ghosts. All of them. Clear as day. Years later, Doc Severinsen admitted in his memoir, Ruth Carson was there every night after she died. We all knew. We never told Johnny, because how do you tell someone their dead mother is in a band? But that night she finally spoke. Said she needed to free him from his guilt. Said the music had been holding her here, and she needed to let go. After that night, she was gone. The space beside Tommy's keyboard was finally empty. But sometimes, during the really good shows, the ones where Johnny was truly happy, we'd hear it. Just a few notes of the Missouri Waltz, played by nobody, from nowhere, just to let us know she was still watching. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Because in an age where we document everything, where we photograph every moment, we need to remember the night the Tonight Show band stopped playing and the dead performed instead. The night Ruth Carson conducted her final symphony. The night Johnny learned that absence isn't empty. It's full of all the love that chose to step aside so we could step forward. The sheet music Ruth left is now in the Smithsonian. Musicians who try to play it say it's impossible. The arrangement requires notes that don't exist, harmonies that can't be reached. Unless, they say, you're playing with someone who isn't there. Then it sounds perfect. Then it sounds like a mother's lullaby, played across the space between life and death. Johnny's last show in 1992 ended with the band playing the Missouri Waltz. As the final note faded, Johnny looked at the empty space beside Tommy's keyboard and said, "Thanks, Mom, for everything, for the pause that let me hear you, for the music that let you go." The camera pulled back. The band took their bows, and in the silence after the music stopped, those listening carefully swear they heard it. One last note, played on no instrument, by fingers that weren't there, saying goodbye in the only language Ruth Carson had ever truly spoken, music itself.